Hi, everybody. It's John Scanlon with the Irish Hypnotherapy Conference podcast. And today we are talking to Kaz Riley. Kaz, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you. It's a lovely, lovely day here. All the wind and the rain has stopped. So there you go. Um, you're going to be speaking in Dublin.
I am very
This your
very
first,
excited to be speaking in Dublin.
is this your first time coming to Dublin to speak?
To speak, yes. Is that right? Yes, yeah. To speak, yes. I had to think that I've taught in other places in Ireland
Right,
on the other side of Ireland, not Southern
right.
Ireland. So yeah, it'll be my first time speaking in Dublin.
Brilliant. Well, let me ask you. So I'll go through the format, if you like, is basically to start asking people, like, what's your background, and how did you get into hypnosis? Why is it that hypnosis works for you?
Okay, so my introduction to hypnosis is probably a little unusual. In fact, that it was Scooby-Doo, believe it or not. It
One
was
of my
the
favorite cartoons, I have to say.
evil clown episode when I was just a youngster, and it just caught my imagination. And along with that, and just a kind of an interest in what my grandfather used to call it kind of calm talking when I used to get very anxious as a kid, which I now know obviously was hypnosis. I don't think he even knew it was hypnosis. And I used to use calm talking and a bit of inspiration from the evil clown episode of Scooby Doo to hypnotize my sister, believe it or not, when she was kind of scared at night. And we used to have a scarf that I used to tie from her bed to mine because we weren't allowed to get out of bed. And I used to tell her that all the bad feelings that she was feeling, all the scared feelings would come down the scarf and into my bed so she could sleep well at night. So that's kind of where it started. And I've always had an interest. I was always the weird kid, the slightly oddball with an interest in unusual things when I was younger. But when I went to university in Liverpool, I took myself off for some counselling actually, because I used to suffer from terrible anxiety, like really debilitating anxiety. In fact, the chap that I was doing the work with, you said I was one of the most anxious kind of youngsters he'd ever seen. And it just so happened that this guy was a hypnotherapist as well. And I came out of it a few years later. His name was Eamon O'Brien, a fellow Irishman, actually, who absolutely changed my life and the path that I took. So I was there doing my biology degree, which I loved. And that was when I knew that at some point in my life, I wanted to be a hypnotherapist. So went and worked in the pharmaceutical industry, which gave me a great background for a lot of the things that I work with. I worked for Pfizer and a few other companies. So pain, antidepressant, Viagra, all of those kinds of things were markets that I worked in. I managed to get them to pay for quite a lot of my training. And then 22 years ago, became a full-time hypnotherapist. So I've been doing this now 22 years.
Well,
So from Scooby-Doo till now, from Scooby-Doo to sexual freedom, what can I tell you? It's
and
not a usual thing.
no, it's not. It's not something you hear every day, but I absolutely adored Scooby-Doo. I have to say, it was one of my favorite cartoons, even as a teenager, when I'm probably supposed to be outgrown of those things. But there you go. And so you work in the pharmaceutical industry, and how did you make that graduation then to hypnotherapy?
Well, knowing what I wanted to do, so I think that was the thing. Once you know the thing that you want to do, I had to do training, obviously take some training, learn some stuff. So I studied with the London College of Clinical Hypnosis. I studied with the Northern College of Clinical Hypnosis, which was based over in Hull. So I went to those two different schools. Managed to get a lot of things like NLP and all of that because it was all a business environment.
Yeah.
And also working in that industry, apart from the kind of therapy background areas, because we needed to know a lot, got me kind of used to using things like clinical papers, all of that kind of stuff. I am a science-based person that's become more woo-woo as I've evolved as a hypnotherapist, whereas most other people seem to do it the opposite way around. But I've definitely become more woo-woo. But what it also did was that gave me a great background in business, because even though I was working for big international companies, I was responsible for running my own area. So
Mm-hmm.
it got me used to rejection, actually, which is
Right.
something that I
Okay.
often teach with my students. Things like, and I think this really set me up in business, is I used to go out every morning with a handful of business cards, and I would go to 30 doctor surgeries, knowing that I'd be lucky if I got to see 2 or 3 of them that day. So when I started my business, like I wrote to 500 dentists, 300 of this, 400 of that, fully expecting that I wouldn't get kind of much response, but knowing once I did, then I would get those referrals through. And that really kind of put me on the right path with my business, because when I speak to my students now, I won't mention any names, and I'll say, they want to do dental hypnosis or whatever. I'll say, well, go talk to the dentist. And they'll come back to me a couple of weeks later and say nobody's interested. And when I ask them how many they saw, they'll say, well, I asked 3 and nobody was interested. I'm like, you need to add a couple of notes onto that, and then you'll probably get your referrals. So yeah, so kind of moving from that into that background. But that's probably one of the best things it taught me, was to hear no, and then to carry on anyway, carry on regardless.
That's really interesting, because most people come at it from the other angle, as you've said. So business skills tend to be not as strong. No disrespect to anybody, but a lot of therapists are therapists for the reasons of being therapists, not necessarily regarding it as a business. And I always remember reading, I think it was Brian Tracy, was one of his books, and he was talking about some practice. I can't remember the name of the company, but they would literally spend the first hour ringing to get no's. And it's just so that they could actually handle the rejection part of it, and get better at accepting that a lot of people will say no. It's a really interesting skill. So if somebody was starting out who doesn't have business skills, like realizing that most therapists are self-employed, so business is a huge aspect to that.
Well, it's essential, because if you don't have that in place, if you don't have a plan, if you don't kind of know where you're going, then you won't get the clients, so you can't be a therapist. So even though my goal was always to be a hypnotherapist, that my motivation is to go out and do what I do and to help people, I can only do that if people know where I am. And it's an interesting one with that. I'm certainly not a business guru by any chance, but I do run I do run a really successful hypnosis business, and have done for 22 years, ridden through 2 recessions and having 2 children, and all of that kind of stuff, COVID, all of that, and we're still here and we're stronger than ever. So I think it's important that you have to look at it from that angle, of the business angle first, because it ultimately allows you to do what you want to do, to actually see the clients and make the difference, and get paid for it, because we do have to pay our mortgages and feed the kids and all of that kind of stuff. So being able to hear no, actually, and to kind of deal with that rejection, and not to worry too much about the people that are interested, not trying to convert people that are, kind of saying it's not for them. We'll probably talk about this a bit later, but I think that's one of the key things, is to target the audience that you want to help, and then speak to them rather than trying to speak to everybody. And that's something that I spend a lot of time doing, which is why you don't see me an awful lot advertising on social media, on there's hardly anything on my Instagram. My Facebook is full of kids and my dog, all of that kind of stuff, because I spend more time putting out information that people will find that I'm actually searching for what I do, or searching for an answer to the problems that I deal with for them. So I find that to be much more effective than trying to shout out and be, I always say Facebook, Instagram is a bit like trying to shout the loudest when other 55,000 other people are trying to shout at the same time.
Yes.
Whereas if I can be the place that people will find me when they're looking, then you become that beacon of light and where the hope lies for them, which is a very different thing than doing this on, on all the social media. And it's also evergreen, so it stays there forever, rather than a post that lasts for 2 seconds.
How do you find them? How do you find those places?
Which places?
The places where you get to speak
Where do
directly
I
to the
go?
audience?
Well, I put information out, so my YouTube channel and my website. So Google, those two and kind of online places. For years, I've done kind of my locality, and now more internationally, I do this now where I'll go out and speak to groups, so relevant groups. So if I'm talking about, help through menopause with hypnosis, I'll go and speak to the WI. If I'm speaking to erectile dysfunction, I might go to the Rotary or, places like that where those people are. And now this is where social media, I guess, does come in, is I'm starting to do some stuff aimed at different demographics, but I'm very clear about what my client looks like and who I'm speaking to. So for some people, it won't be interesting to them because it's not relevant to them, but to connect in, because we actually don't need that many clients. This is the mistake that people make, where they think they need thousands of clients. And actually, I know from my business model, the way that I work, I probably need to find 2 clients a week and that do about 6 sessions with me. So you can be much more specific and targeted about who you're talking to.
And your market, if you like, and the stuff that you deal with is sexual freedom. Right? How did you define that? How did you define that for you?
The way that I define it is sexual freedom is the ability to choose, and choice is a massive thing, to have a satisfying sex life in the absence of sexual dysfunction, guilt and shame. That, for me, in a nutshell, is what sexual freedom is. And that's however that is for that particular client. So for some people, that might mean that they want to have, be comfortable with lots of sexual partners. For others, it might mean that they just want to be able to connect with the person that they want to connect with and get over the things that are holding them back from being able to have the best intimacy and connection and sexual connection with their husband, their wife, their girlfriend, their boyfriend, whoever it may be. And for other people, it actually means that they can even go out into that kind of dating pool. Oh, where did it go? What happened there?
Okay.
Oh, no, you disappeared on me.
Sorry, did I? Okay, let me see.
It just disappeared. That might be my computer or yours, I don't know. But it's about being able to be who they are and comfortable in their sexuality without all this kind of shame that's attached to sex. And there's so much shame that's attached to sex and sexuality and what we think is the norm, because we know that what's on the internet is right, obviously. All of that kind of stuff that we've learned in the playground, information that people have often given us to try and protect us or to stop us doing things, but it's often based in shame. So all of that, it's about kind of deconstructing all of that so that people can just simply enjoy being who they are and enjoying that sexual part of themselves. Because the truth is that as adults, we don't ever stop being sexual. We're not out having sex with people all the time, but being sexually mature is part of adult life. That's one of the things that defines adulthood. So if we're uncomfortable with that and we're very kind of closed down there, the chances are we'll be closed down in other areas of our life too. So it's just about being comfortable with that. Even, and that doesn't mean that we need to do anything other than, if we're married, in a monogamous relationship, that we're just with that one person. It's not saying that we're going to go out and be free. The freedom is to be comfortable in our own sexuality, really.
And how did you define that market for you? Because that is the one you're most known for.
Yeah.
I presume when you started out, did you go directly to that, or did you arrive at?
Well, I think most adults, I've always had an interest in sex. I mean, that's part of being an adult. But that market actually found me. Okay. And it came about was I did some training with the Colorado Hypno Denver, it's called. So it's Lindsay and Drake Eastburn over in Colorado. And Lindsay has run something called Hypnofertility. It must be 25 years. It's a well-established program for fertility. And I took that training in 2004, actually. So, 20 years ago nearly now. And that was a niche that was my first original niche. And that's where I spent a lot of time working with couples who were trying to get pregnant, even more so that were having IVF. The IVF clinics were sending me lots of people because they realized it was helping them. And what I discovered was that there were many couples that were having IVF treatment because there was a sexual dysfunction, or after their IVF, they got sexual dysfunction because they felt very medicalized, very broken. All the fun had gone out of sex. They were having to perform, all kinds of things were going on with that client group. And it occurred to me one day, well, what would happen if we actually dealt with that rather than, just trying to aid somebody through IVF or whatever. And the results were amazing, not only in people were getting pregnant without the need of IVF, but they were connecting back in with their partners. And we know, I don't know if you know very much about IVF, but the divorce rate after IVF is sky high. It's one of the most stressful things that you can do. And a lot of that is down to this disconnection, this physical and sexual disconnection between couples.
And is that blame then, that they start to blame each other for not being able to have a child?
Sometimes it's such a medicalized process. And often when people are trying to have a baby, even without IVF, it becomes very, here's an ovulation stick, so are we on that now? We need to have sex now. So a lot of the connection, the spontaneity, the romance, all the things that make sex great, it just came down to the mechanics. And then, people, it's, kind of laid there thinking, will it happen this time? Will we get pregnant this time? So a lot of pressure. And so the whole thing just becomes very anxiety filled and very stressful. And then, as I kind of started to advertise more, then I was getting different clients that, had nothing to do with the fertility market, but who were feeling very broken because they couldn't get an erection or that they ejaculated too soon. Lots of women feeling very broken because their libidos weren't great, or they'd experienced some kind of sexual assault, or, something that had happened. They weren't able to have orgasms when they thought they should. People that were comparing themselves to what they see on the internet in pornography, or, in films. Hollywood's got a lot to answer for too. And, realizing that just sex education was just completely rubbish right across the board for any age group. I just kind of thought there has to be a different way with this. And, the more I learn, and I've done all kinds of courses, outside of hypnosis, all kinds of reading, look at all the research, it's just kind of realizing that for most people, when we talk about hypnotherapy, we think about there's a glitch in the program, they're running a program and there's a glitch that's gone wrong. So good example of that is a phobia, where, somebody wasn't frightened of dogs, something happened, now they're frightened of the dogs, now they've got a phobia of dogs. That means then they can't go to the park, or they can't have a dog, or they can't go to the friend's house. But with this, what's happening is not that there's a glitch in the program, they're just running the wrong program. So we need to change the program that they're running and then fix the glitches in that, because they've got the wrong information in the first place. So it's a bit more, I'd say, kind of involved, if you like, than just, fixing a phobia. But, and this is the interesting thing, is even if, taking the example of a dog phobia, if you're a person with a dog phobia, and then that means that you can't, the person that you've got a love interest in loves dogs, for example, then that might mean you can't go to their house, you can't go to the park with them, you can't stop over at their house. That actually has an impact on your intimate life, if that's a person that you want to be with. So I always say to all of my students, if you're working with adults, regardless of what you're working with sexual issues, because that sexual anxiety can spill into every aspect of a person's life. And the truth is that 70 to 80% of people will have some kind of sexual issue during their lifetime. It might be that it only lasts a few months, but we know that the statistics show now that, that number, it's that high, and it's only increasing because of all the misinformation that's out there on the internet. So
you mentioned sexual anxiety there quite a lot in that. Is that general anxiety that becomes sexual, or is it sexual anxiety initially?
Okay, it can be both.
Can be both.
If you're a very anxious person, I always say, panic in the bedroom or panic and anxiety, as much as we would love to close the door on it at night and not take it into the bedroom, we all know that people do that if they're having sex or not. That's why they don't sleep. They're awake searching the internet at 3 a.m., which is why I tell all my students, you must have an online booking system, because people will find you at 3 a.m. and if they can book with you, they will. But we also get then where if you've got a sexual anxiety, that can feed out into the rest of your life. So, if you're worried that you're not going to perform well, then that can stop you in other ways. And when I talk about libido, for example, what libido is, we often think of that as the sexual drive, but I redefine that as life force, because our libido impacts on so many areas of our lives or our sexual function, but the rest of our lives impact on our libido and our sexual function. So it's so intertwined that actually, so the answer is sometimes it can be general anxiety. If you've got bad finances and you're stressed about that, you've experienced a bereavement, you are just generally an anxious person, you've got a phobia, you've got social phobia and sexual dysfunction are massively linked. Then all of that's going to have an impact probably on your sex life in some way. And similarly, if you've suddenly got a sexual dysfunction, that can really impact on how you feel about yourself as a person, which then feeds into anxieties in other areas of your life. So the answer is both.
Both. Okay, that makes perfect sense. And how did you then expand your business model? I mean, initially, I assume you saw people in person, but now I know you do a lot of online work. So how did you graduate to that?
Well, partly the demand was there. So I was online on Skype, actually, and even by the telephone. We used to do hypnosis by the telephone 20 years ago for people looking for help in that area, because nobody else was really advertising in that area. And it's like anything, if you put your stuff out there. So I had a website that kind of said all the things that I do, and people would phone up and say, can you help me? But I live however many miles away. Sometimes people would fly in to see me. We don't have to do that so much now. So I've got people coming from all over that would come and spend a day with me. But now, now it's easy on Zoom. So, the internet, this is where the internet is our friend. So that's partly people will find me on YouTube. They find me through my book. I wrote a book called Woman, How to Find, Understand, Embrace Your Sexual Pleasure. That brings me a lot of business. And my website, people actually do go and Google help with erectile dysfunction or help with vaginismus, or and often I come up, and so do my practitioners. Actually, we've got there's about 200 of us now throughout the world that are trained with sexual freedom hypnosis. So, and that number keeps on growing. But and of course things like your convention, I moved from just therapist to therapist and trainer after Hypnothoughts in Las Vegas gave me a chance. And, that really took off, which then started teaching in other areas. So, people watching this, if you're kind of thinking about whether or not they should come to the convention in Ireland or not, going to conventions absolutely changed my life. Not only did I learn lots, but also it helped me kind of understand that I could do that too. And that I'm sure that will be a plan for you, is to, as this expands, to have new people that maybe have never spoken at a convention before.
And there are 3 people who've never done that, 3 local people who haven't done that before, and they'll be speaking this time. So I'm kind of copying. So sorry, Scott.
Well, it's a good model to follow. It's
I know.
I am definitely the poster girl for that. From having never spoken at a convention in the first year I went there, to the second year teaching, to being their keynote speaker for their 10-year anniversary. I mean, that's quite a journey, isn't it?
Yeah, it was quite a journey. If I'm dissecting what you're saying properly, there's almost 2 key or maybe 3 key things that you'd say in the middle of that. One is identify a niche for yourself, or become known for a particular niche. The second is content and getting it to the right people. And the third is business background that doesn't really worry too much about being rejected because there's always somebody who needs your support. Is that fair, or is there more than
I
that?
guess it's resilience. You know, that third point is resilience of keeping going. You know, it's very easy, and also you have to keep on going. So you might fill your clinic up, but then you have to keep filling it up, which is why I like information out there that's evergreen, because people will find it. You know, I've got people that are contacting me about stuff I put out there 5 or 6 years ago. Whereas this is what I don't like about some of the social media, is that once it's, you know, it's past you on that day on the scroll, and then it's gone forever. You can, you know, and there's other ways that you can use that, but that kind of resilience and learning business, I think learning business is important. Having a plan is important, having goals and making sure they're realistic. You know, I kind of set goals every 3 months. I don't always meet them, but then I'll understand, you know, where I am, and not being afraid to fail. You know, I've put out more stuff that hasn't done well than stuff that has done well. It doesn't mean that the stuff that didn't do well was bad. It just meant that I could gauge where the interest was, so then I can focus my attentions in those ways, which then leads to the content, which was your second point. And I'm a big fan of not being salesy, even though I come from a sales and marketing background. I passionately believe that if I put out good content, whether that's at a convention or online, that is essentially my sales pitch, because people will see what I'm about, will see what resonates with them, will hopefully connect in with it, and then that makes them want to work with me more, either as a client or as a student. And that I've always believed that, because there's nothing more than I hate than going somewhere and then somebody just telling me all the reasons why they're the best and I should train with them, or I should buy whatever their thing is. You know,
we don't like to be told what to do,
isn't it, you know?
None of us like to be told what to do.
No, especially not hypnotists, definitely not.
Absolutely. I think we might definitely fall into that category. And of course, what you're also saying is where you place your content, i.e. your website and your YouTube, rather than saying necessarily Facebook, that's gone 24 hours later, if I'm also hearing you. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
and being bold enough to write about the content that you're passionate about. It's this not fearing what other people think, you know, especially with something like sexual freedom. You know, at first I was like, my God, can I really write about this stuff? And actually, yes, I can. And the more frank and direct I am about it, the better the response is, which tells us, you know, people are just looking for somebody where they can just openly talk about these things and get to the root of the problem and get rid of it. You know, we don't, you know, it's all valid stuff.
Well, I mean, it was very suppressed for long times, and this country in particular, with any, you know, Catholic areas, would have experienced an awful lot of that. So what is it that you enjoy about your job then? As in, you know, you see transformations in people, and I'm not guiding you with that, but I'm assuming that that's what it is, that you see the freedom that it gives them, not just sexually, but across all of their life as a consequence.
I mean, there isn't anything better than that, is there? You know, in terms of job satisfaction, when, you know, and I'm so far, or I've been doing this for so long now, it's then when you see the next generation coming into you as clients, where the parents will call you and say, you know, I saw you 20 years ago or 18 years ago. My son's gone to university and's now got this awful performance anxiety about giving a presentation. Can you help him? You know, it's when, what I love, I guess, is that when we make an impact like that and you see somebody, you facilitate that transition for somebody. I always tell my clients, I didn't do it, you did. I just kind of guide you through that process. But, you know, when you see the impact that has on people's lives, whether that was then that they got rid of their sexual dysfunction so they could have a child, maybe that, you know, I've been to countless weddings over the years of people that at one point thought they would never have a relationship, you know, all kinds of just really wonderful things like that. But also, you know, I like to, when you get that referral, when somebody says you need my hypnotist, when just as a person has their doctor or whatever it might be, you become their hypnotist. and and they recommend you to everybody, and they will always come back to you. I always have an open door policy. Again, I always say our clients are our greatest teachers. And even for things like general anxiety, so we get somebody to a point where they don't have general anxiety anymore, they're much calmer. I remember it was about 18 years ago, a client of mine, she said to me, so I'll come back next month then. And I went down the line that I'd been taught, which was, oh no, you don't need me anymore. And she looked at me very sternly and she said, I go every 3 months and have my teeth cleaned at the dentist. I go every 6 weeks and have my hair cut and coloured. Why is my mental health any less important than that? I was like, well, I can't argue with that. So, I do have a group of clients that have been with me for a long time, and there's nothing wrong with them. They know there's nothing wrong with them. The whole point is that we kind of maintain that kind of mental health. We keep things clean and tidy.
Really interesting. I've often used the analogy that, our gardens, we'll weed them, we'll take out the rubbish, and we know instinctively to do that, but no one ever really teaches us how to mind our mental health. And that's, of course, what we do. So that's a really, and it's not often something that people talk about too much in terms of, people coming back, whether it's every 6 months, 3 months, 12 months, or just anytime they feel something, but they can easily pick up the phone and ring. So I can see what you've just said there, the job satisfaction and seeing people in their lives, and even going to weddings and having fun as a consequence of just being able to help somebody. And most hypnotherapists will be able to sit and recount, the clients who've been in and their lives have been transformed. Yet still, hypnotherapy becomes one of those that's kind of the last resort almost in many cases. What would you feel the profession would need to do to kind of become more visible, more accepted, more as a go-to?
I think there's a few things. The one that, I think we can all be a part of is that we have to go out and teach people. We have to go out and teach people about this therapy modality, demystify it a little bit. No, I don't mean make it less magical. There's a difference between those two things. But, we need to go out and teach people. We can't sit in our offices waiting and hoping that people will find us. So even though I'm kind of saying that all my information's out there for people to find, I'm still very actively going out there and kind of teaching people about what hypnosis can do. And I think often one of the things that people will do is they will go out and they'll do a talk about hypnosis. Whereas I'm a big believer we need to go out and talk about the applications of hypnosis. So we can talk about, if we go and talk about anxiety and what anxiety is and how it manifests and how it makes people feel, but hey, look, there's this wonderful thing that can help you. This is how that works. And this thing is called hypnosis. I think we will do much better than just going out and talking about the power of the subconscious mind or whatever it might be. We need to make it applicable to people's everyday lives, and I think that's probably one of the most important things that we need to do.
That makes so much sense, actually, rather than literally just trying to explain hypnotherapy to somebody, because if you're dealing with someone's mind, you're dealing with all aspects of their life. And what's important to them right there is that sexual dysfunction, that anxiety, that fear of dogs, that whatever it is that they need to overcome. So that actually makes so much sense. So it's targeting it specifically towards each of the individual aspects of it.
This is it. And certainly, that's I've certainly found that when the people that I work with will find me, it's normally because they'll say something that I was talking about really resonated with them. So, you're kind of meeting them where they are and then providing the solution in whatever way you're kind of connecting with the public. I guess the other thing I stopped doing, which might sound kind of counterproductive to your question, is I stopped trying to convince people that weren't interested.
Okay.
I'd stopped being on a crusade to convert everybody into, being a hypnosis believer. I started focusing my efforts where they would have the most impact and they would do the most good. And, so I don't need to convince. If I've got some local group that think that, hypnosis is the devil's work, I let them carry on thinking that. And, you know, and it's amazing how often when I don't engage in kind of spats and fights, that 6 months later they'll come and find me and ask them to tell them more. So I tend to focus on what I'm doing. And I think if we all as hypnotists focus on what we're doing, the services that we offer, the support that we provide, the solutions that we give, and put that out there, and we all try to lift each other up. I think there's too much, dare I say it, kind of jarring and spatting between hypnotherapists, usually online, I have to say. But, you know, I think if we work more as a collective, just to kind of really up our profile, I think at the moment we've got an amazing opportunity, especially post-COVID, where now everybody's quite much more comfortable to be online. You know, there is definitely a mental health crisis. Certainly in countries like the UK and Ireland, the NHS is absolutely overwhelmed. I know the last time this happened, which was actually after the last recession, where, you know, we've got ridiculously long waiting lists on the NHS, that is when I made a massive shift in my business and it really took off. And that's because people can't wait for as long as the NHS. They've got jobs to do, they've got families to look after. And, you know, we've got this amazing opportunity to really raise the profile of hypnosis and hypnotherapy in general, right across the board. And I think that's it. It's maybe not trying to convince people that we think are influential, but actually speaking to the people is probably one of the most profound things.
I had that conversation over the weekend where somebody was talking about regulatory stuff, and I was like, no, I think really it genuinely has to be a groundswell of, you know, you help me stop smoking, so therefore I'm going to refer you to anyone, or you help me with a, you know, erectile dysfunction issue, so, or you help me with IVF that I didn't have to do. And it just keeps building that way rather than any other way. Because a changing authority takes forever, and there's loads of vested interests at play as well.
Well, so, you know, even if we were more, there was a kind of a regulatory body that was not a voluntary one, because we have several now anyway. But even if, what does that mean? Does that mean then what? We all have to retrain, those of us that have been around for 20 years? Does it mean that only doctors and psychologists can do hypnosis? Well, we haven't got enough of those anyway. That's part of the problem. So, you know, or does it mean that we have to standardize what we do? And I think that's a very dangerous place to be, because, you know, if you're doing exactly the same thing with every client, then I would question whether or not you were doing it right, in fairness. Because
absolutely, 8 billion people on the planet, we're all different. We all have different ways of accessing our minds, and different techniques to work for different people, which I know. So some of the scientific research, and Gary Coles was talking about how he had to construct research, and it was like, it's so, you have to use a script, it has to be the same script for everybody. And how do you tell people in a control group they're not being hypnotized, you know? And so there was all kinds of stuff that doesn't really fit the hypnosis model, you know, or the way that.
It doesn't really fit any therapy model. I think this is why, you know, things like CBT sometimes get a bad rep. There's nothing wrong with CBT, but if it's so standardized that they teach somebody a process rather than teach them to understand what they're doing, or to even question why they're doing what they're doing, then it stands to reason they won't get as good results if it's standardized. But that's how it has to be to get it through, you know, nice guidelines and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, there are some things that they did standardize with hypnosis treatment for IBS, for example, which they did do plenty of studies on, and, you know, other studies. But what we can do is look at the studies and take what we need from it, and then use that in our practice. But, you know, so I think we do. It's about us reaching out to the public, which is probably what we should be doing anyway if we want successful businesses. So it's a win-win, really.
And I think there's an expression that came to mind recently, and it was cooperation, not competition. Which, you know, what you were saying is hypnotherapists come together, you know, and promote the profession as a whole. We all have different approaches, we all have different ways, and we all have different businesses. But to expand, you know, the amount of people who use hypnotherapy benefits absolutely everybody. Right, last question.
Okay.
What does hypnosis mean to you?
Hypnosis for me is many things, but ultimately for me, it's a way of life. So I would say, and I have done for 25 years, is I live a hypnotic life. So hypnosis runs through everything that I do. So I use it myself. I use it with my family. I have 2 children, both use hypnosis and all kinds of stuff for different things. Some of them sometimes even getting caught hypnotizing kids in the playground, but for good reasons, I might add. But it's just so ingrained in who I am and what I do. I can't imagine never doing hypnosis, because we do it all the time anyway, don't we? But if I say what does it mean for me? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a way of life for me.
Yeah, it's
and it can add to just about anything. It might not solve everything. I think we run into danger but I think hypnosis will enhance, improve, or ease most things in life, even the most difficult things. And it allows us to be very present in ourselves and in our lives. And I think sometimes, we were discussing, weren't we, about work-life balance before we started this podcast today. But if we live a hypnotic life, it allows us to find that balance a little bit more. And it also helps us to find that balance, or help other people find that balance too. So, and that's a very kind of broad answer, but that's the answer. Is, for me, hypnosis is a way of life. It's not something that I do. It's very much of who I am, and the way
beautiful,
that I
beautiful way to say it. Beautiful way to say it. Kaz, I thank you so much for your time. And I'm so looking forward to seeing you in Dublin. And I know so many other people are. So I will see you in April.
You will indeed.
Listen, and thank you, everybody, wherever you are and whatever time you're watching this. Have a wonderful day, and we will see you all in April in Dublin. Thank you very much.